The moving truck pulled away as I stood on the porch, keys jingling in my hand. Aunt Elaine had left me her house in Oakwood Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood with pristine lawns and perfect fences. The grief of losing her still felt fresh, but inheriting her home provided a strange comfort. I would live where she had lived, walk the same halls, tend the same garden. I had barely finished carrying the last box inside when I noticed a woman striding purposefully across my lawn. She wore a pressed pantsuit despite the summer heat, and her blonde bob swung with each determined step. Her smile seemed plastered on, not reaching her eyes. "Hello there," she called out, waving a clipboard. "I am Corinne Matthews, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. I do not believe we have been properly introduced." I extended my hand. "Michael Williams, I just moved in today. This was my aunt's place." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Elaine Porter was your aunt. I had no idea she had." She paused, examining me from head to toe, relatives in the area. "She was my mother's sister," I explained, feeling oddly defensive. "I inherited the property after she passed last month." "So you are renting it out?" Corinne asked, her pen hovering over her clipboard. I frowned. "No, I am living here. I own the house now." Something flashed across her face before her smile returned, tighter than before. "Well, welcome to Oakwood Estates. We have very specific standards in this community. I have prepared a compliance packet for you." She thrust a thick envelope into my hands. "These are our HOA bylaws, community guidelines, and a few notices of current violations I have observed." I glanced down at the envelope. "Violations, I just arrived. The lawn needs mowing. Your aunt's old bird feeder is not HOA approved. And I noticed you have not submitted your exterior paint color for approval, though it appears you are planning to repaint." She gestured to the painting supplies on my porch. "I am just touching up the trim, same color. All exterior modifications require board approval. Page 37, Section 4, Paragraph 6. She pointed to the packet with a red fingernail. I nodded slowly, trying to remain polite. "I will look it over. Thank you for stopping by." As Corinne turned to leave, I noticed curtains shifting in neighboring windows. A few residents stood at their fences, watching our interaction before quickly turning away when I looked in their direction. That night, as I unpacked in what was now my kitchen, I browsed through the HOA packet. The violations were trivial at best, fabricated at worst. My aunt had maintained this property immaculately. The bird feeder had been present for over a decade, according to family photos. "It will blow over," I told myself, placing the packet aside. "First day jitters, that is all." But 3 days later, a formal letter appeared in my mailbox citing 5 HOA violations, each carrying a hefty fine. The next morning, as I left for work, Corinne stood across the street, photographing my house with her phone, making notes on her clipboard. When I returned home that evening, something caught my eye at the front door. A plain white note had been taped there. No letterhead, no signature, just 5 words that made my blood run cold. "Wrong neighborhood, not welcome here." I slowly removed the note, my fingers trembling slightly. I had faced prejudice before, but this felt different. This was my home, my property, my inheritance, and someone wanted me to know I did not belong. I stepped inside and locked the door, looking around at the boxes still waiting to be unpacked. Aunt Elaine's photograph smiled at me from the mantel. Her home should have felt safe, welcoming. Instead, I felt like an intruder in my own house. That night, I laid awake listening to every creak and settling sound, wondering what I had walked into. I had the deed. I had the keys. But suddenly, I had to prove I belonged here. I had no idea this was just the beginning of a neighborhood war I never asked for. 1 week after moving in, I woke up early to head to work, only to find my driveway empty. My car was gone. Panic surged through me until I spotted a small notice on the ground where my vehicle had been parked. Vehicle in violation of HOA parking policy, towed at owner's expense. I called the towing company listed on the notice, my anger building with each ring. "Yeah, we got your car," the dispatcher drawled. "HOA president called it in, said you were parking a commercial vehicle in a residential area." "Commercial vehicle? It is a Toyota Camry," I explained, exasperated. "Look, buddy, we just do what we are told. You can pick it up for $300 plus daily storage fees." I arrived at work 2 hours late after spending the morning retrieving my car. That evening, a notice appeared on my door announcing the monthly HOA meeting. Perhaps this would be my chance to introduce myself properly and clear up any misunderstandings. I could not have been more wrong. The community center buzzed with conversation as I entered, but the room fell into uncomfortable silence upon my arrival. Karen sat at the head table, shuffling papers with deliberate importance. "Michael Williams," she announced, looking up. "How nice of you to join us. We were just discussing the unprecedented rise in bylaw violations in our community." Several residents turned to stare at me. "I would like to address the car towing incident," I said, taking an empty seat at the back. "My vehicle is not commercial. It does not violate any bylaws." Karen smiled thinly. "The board has determined that vehicles used for ride-sharing services are considered commercial usage." "I do not drive for any ride-sharing service," I replied, keeping my voice level despite my rising frustration. "That is not what our records indicate," she countered, producing a sheet of paper. "We have photographic evidence of you dropping off passengers last Tuesday." "Those were my colleagues from work. I carpool." Laughter rippled through the room. Karen made no attempt to hide her smirk. "The decision has been made, Mr. Williams. This meeting has more important matters to address." I sat through the remainder of the meeting, silent and seething, as Karen and her allies discussed trivial matters as if they were national security concerns. The landscaping of the community entrance, the appropriate color temperature for exterior lighting, the prohibition against vegetable gardens visible from the street. The following weekend, I wheeled my trash bins to the curb for Monday collection. When I returned home from work that evening, the bins remained uncollected. Someone had painted "Renter Trash" across both containers in bold red letters. I photographed the vandalism before scrubbing it off, my hands raw from the effort. The next day, I found an official city notice taped to my door. According to the document, a complaint had been filed alleging I was squatting illegally in a property I did not own. "This is getting ridiculous," I muttered, adding the notice to a growing file of harassment evidence. The escalation continued relentlessly. Karen placed dozens of small HOA violation flags across my lawn one night, each marking a supposed infraction. Grass too long, unauthorized plants, decorative stones not approved. My mailbox began yielding fewer and fewer items. Bills that should have arrived went missing. Packages disappeared from my porch within minutes of delivery. One evening, as I returned from work, I caught Karen demonstrating to another board member exactly how my front garden violated regulations. They scattered quickly when they saw me approaching. That night, I made a decision. I installed security cameras covering every angle of my property. I began documenting every interaction, every notice, every incident with photographs and video. I started a detailed journal of dates and times. Karen had declared war on the wrong person. I had been patient. I had been polite. But now I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. It was time to look beneath the surface of Oakwood Estates and its tyrannical HOA president. After another exhausting HOA meeting filled with sideways glances and thinly veiled hostility, I returned home and opened my laptop. If Karen wanted to play investigator, I could play that game too. Public records were just that, public. I started with basic searches, looking up Karen Matthews in county records. The results were illuminating. Over the past 5 years, she had been named in 3 separate lawsuits, all settled out of court. All 3 plaintiffs had been homeowners of color. Further digging revealed a pattern of complaints filed with the County Housing Authority. Reports of selective enforcement, discriminatory application of HOA rules, orchestrated harassment campaigns against undesirable residents. None had progressed to formal charges, but the pattern was unmistakable. Karen had done this before. She had driven people out of their homes through bureaucratic terrorism, and she had gotten away with it every time. I was taking notes on my findings when a soft knock at my door interrupted my research. Peering through the peephole, I saw an older woman glancing nervously over her shoulder. I recognized her from across the street. She rarely left her house and never spoke at meetings. "I cannot stay long," she whispered when I opened the door. "They will notice." She pressed a manila envelope into my hands. "I have been on the board for 15 years. I have watched Karen destroy this community. What she is doing to you, she has done it before." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. The woman looked down. "My grandson is about your age. He wanted to move in with me after his divorce. Karen made it clear he would not be welcome here." She glanced back at the street. "Read these, be careful." She hurried away before I could thank her. Inside the envelope, I found copies of internal HOA documents, meeting minutes, financial records, email exchanges between board members. The evidence of coordinated harassment was spelled out in black and white. But the most valuable document was a property record. According to this information, Karen did not own her home. She was a tenant. Her lease agreement showed she had been renting for the past 4 years, with the current term expiring in just 3 months. Curious, I dug deeper into the property records. Who was Karen's landlord? The listed owner was a limited liability company, EP Properties, LLC. EP Properties, EP, Elaine Porter. My aunt. I sat back, stunned by the revelation. My aunt had been Karen's landlord, which meant I was now Karen's landlord. The woman who had been trying to drive me out of the neighborhood was living in a house that I owned. She had no idea. My aunt had managed the property through a management company, keeping her ownership private. I pulled out my aunt's estate documents, confirming what I now suspected. Among the assets transferred to me was a rental property, Karen's house. The management company had continued handling the property after my aunt's death, with the rent payments now coming to me. The irony was almost too perfect to be true. The HOA president who questioned my right to live in my own home was a tenant in a house that belonged to me, and in 3 months her lease would be up for renewal. I leaned back in my chair, a sense of calm washing over me for the first time since moving in. Knowledge was power, and now I possessed knowledge that would change everything. With my newfound information, I contacted a property attorney who specialized in landlord-tenant disputes. I brought my extensive documentation, the harassment evidence, the discriminatory application of HOA rules, the missing mail, the vandalism, and most importantly, proof of my ownership of Corinne's residence. "This is quite a situation," the attorney remarked, reviewing my files. "You have options as both a homeowner facing harassment and as a landlord." "I want to do this by the book," I explained. "Completely legal, completely justified." We spent hours formulating a strategy. I would attend the next HOA meeting, where I would observe but not confront. The attorney would prepare an official notice of non-renewal for Corinne's lease, citing violation of neighborhood standards and documented harassment of another resident, me, as grounds for termination. The days leading up to the meeting were oddly peaceful. Knowing what was coming brought me a sense of calm I had not felt since moving in. I greeted Corinne with a pleasant smile when we passed on the street. Her look of confusion was worth every moment of suffering I had endured. The community center filled up for the monthly HOA meeting. I arrived early, taking a seat near the front. Corinne noted my presence with a tight smile, clearly suspicious of my newfound confidence. "Before we begin," Corinne announced once the meeting started, "I would like to address the continuing problem of certain residents refusing to comply with our community standards." A few heads turned toward me. I simply smiled. "Mr. Williams," Corinne continued, "the board has received numerous complaints about your property. Would you care to explain why you believe yourself exempt from our rules?" "I would actually like to ask a few questions about the HOA bylaws," I replied calmly. "This is not a question and answer session," Corinne snapped. "According to Article 3, Section 2, any homeowner has the right to inquire about bylaw enforcement during open meetings," I noted, pulling out a copy of the HOA Constitution. Corinne's eyes narrowed. "What is your question?" "Do the bylaws apply equally to homeowners and renters?" I asked innocently. A murmur ran through the room. Corinne's knuckles whitened around her gavel. "Of course," she replied, "though homeowners have certain additional privileges in matters of voting and board membership." "And does the HOA president need to be a homeowner?" I continued. "Absolutely," Corinne answered quickly. "It says so right in the bylaws, a requirement I have fulfilled for 4 years." I nodded thoughtfully. "One final question. Does the HOA have the authority to evict residents they deem undesirable?" Corinne's face flushed. "The HOA cannot evict anyone. Only a property owner can do that. But we can and do enforce standards that make our community special." "Thank you for that clarification," I said pleasantly. Corinne seemed unsettled by my calm demeanor. Throughout the meeting, she kept glancing in my direction, clearly waiting for an outburst that never came. As the meeting concluded, I approached the front table where Corinne was gathering her papers. "I have something for you," I said, placing a sealed certified envelope on the table. "What is this?" she demanded, eyeing the envelope suspiciously. "Just some documents requiring your attention." Several board members watched curiously as Corinne tore open the envelope. Inside was a formal notice. Her lease would not be renewed upon expiration. The letter detailed the reasons: documented harassment of another resident, violation of community standards, and false representation of homeowner status to secure an HOA leadership position. At the bottom of the letter was my signature as the property owner. Corinne's face drained of color as she read. Her hands began to shake. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "No mistake," I replied quietly. "EP Properties was my aunt, Elaine Porter. I inherited all her assets, including your rental house. You have 30 days to vacate the property." The room had gone silent. Everyone was watching now. "You cannot do this," Karen hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Actually, I can. It is my house. I am your landlord," I smiled. "And unlike you, I have the documentation to prove it." Karen stood up abruptly, sending her chair clattering backward. "This is fraud. You are lying." She turned to the assembled neighbors. "He is trying to steal my home. Someone call the police." I remained perfectly calm, pulling out a folder containing property records, the transfer of deed, and my aunt's will. "The police are welcome to review these documents, as is anyone else who is interested." Karen stormed out, nearly knocking over an elderly board member in her haste. The remaining attendees erupted in whispers and exclamations. I nodded politely to the stunned board members and walked out, leaving the documentation on the table for all to see. The trap had been set, the truth was out, and Karen's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. I awoke the next morning to the sound of chanting outside my window. Peering through the blinds, I saw Karen standing on the sidewalk with a small group of supporters. They carried hastily made signs: "Stop fraudulent evictions" and "Save our HOA president." Karen had a smartphone mounted on a selfie stick, recording herself as she paced back and forth. "This is day one of our protest against discriminatory housing practices," she declared loudly, her voice carrying clearly through my closed windows. "After 4 years of dedicated service to this community, I am being targeted by a new resident who has falsely claimed ownership of my home." I sighed and called my attorney, who advised me to document everything but not engage. "Let her dig her own grave," he counseled. Throughout the day, I received texts from colleagues sharing links to Karen's social media posts. She had uploaded a tearful video describing herself as a victim of housing discrimination. "They are trying to force me out because I uphold standards," she sobbed into the camera. "Now I know how it feels to be marginalized." The internet's response was swift and merciless. Someone recognized Karen from previous viral videos where she had harassed delivery drivers and lawn workers. Others began digging into public records, finding the lawsuits I had uncovered. Her carefully constructed narrative began to unravel within hours. My attorney issued a public statement on my behalf. Mr. Williams legally inherited both his current residence and a rental property from his late aunt. The tenant of that property has engaged in documented harassment against Mr. Williams and has falsely represented herself as a homeowner to secure an HOA leadership position. Non-renewal of her lease is based on these violations and is fully within Mr. Williams' rights as the property owner. Local news outlets picked up the story by the next day. The headlines were devastating for Karen. HOA president evicted by her landlord, a black homeowner she harassed, and woman who tried to drive black man out of neighborhood learns he owns her house. Karen's employer, a real estate company, ironically, released a statement distancing themselves from her actions. By that afternoon, they announced she had been terminated, citing behavior inconsistent with our values of fairness and inclusivity. Her protest fizzled as quickly as it had begun. Neighbors who had initially stood with her quietly disappeared. Some even approached me privately to apologize for not speaking up sooner. "She had us all terrified," one woman admitted. "If you opposed Karen, your life became miserable. Dead plants would appear in your garden. Your mail would go missing. Your garbage would not be collected." The community's fear of Karen had been replaced by embarrassment at having enabled her behavior for so long. The social media firestorm had exposed not just one woman's prejudice, but an entire neighborhood's complicity through silent acceptance. 7 days after the HOA meeting, Corinne's social media accounts went silent. Her protest signs disappeared from my sidewalk, but I knew better than to believe this meant surrender. People like Corinne never admit defeat. They simply change tactics. 3 days before the eviction deadline, I was visited by two police officers. They stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Williams, we have a restraining order that has been filed against you," the older officer explained, handing me a document. "You are required to stay at least 500 feet away from Corinne Matthews." I scanned the paperwork. Corinne claimed I had threatened her at the HOA meeting, stalked her home, and made her fear for her safety. "This is absurd," I said. "I own her home. How can I stay 500 feet away from a property I legally own?" The officers exchanged glances. "We are just serving the papers, sir. You will need to appear in court next week to contest it." After they left, I called my attorney again. "She is trying to prevent the eviction by making it legally impossible for me to be near the property," I explained. "A transparent delay tactic," he agreed. "We will file an emergency motion to dismiss. In the meantime, document everything and avoid any contact with her." The judge saw through Corinne's ploy immediately. The restraining order was dismissed for lack of evidence, and the court admonished her for abusing the legal system. But Corinne had succeeded in delaying the inevitable by a few precious days. On the morning of the rescheduled eviction, I received a frantic call from the property management company. The agent who had gone to inspect Corinne's house had found disaster. In a final act of vengeance, Corinne had vandalized the property. Cabinet doors had been removed. Faucets were missing. Walls that had been pristine were now gouged and stained. The garden had been destroyed, plants uprooted and strewn across the lawn. I met with police officers at the property, carefully documenting each act of destruction. Criminal charges for property damage would now be added to the civil case against her. When the sheriff arrived to execute the eviction, Corinne stood on the front porch, arms crossed defiantly. Neighbors gathered at a distance, watching the spectacle unfold. "You cannot make me leave," she declared loudly. "I have rights." "Ma'am, I have a court order," the sheriff replied wearily. "You have had proper notice. It is time to go." "This is my home," Corinne screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. "No, Corinne," I said quietly. "It is my house, it always was." The movers began carrying out what remained of her belongings as Corinne watched, her face contorted with impotent rage. When she refused to move her car from the garage, the sheriff called a tow truck, the same company that had towed my car months earlier. As her vehicle was hoisted onto the flatbed, something inside Corinne seemed to break. The facade of righteous indignation collapsed, revealing the bitter, hateful person beneath. She screamed obscenities, pointing at me, at the sheriff, at the gathering neighbors who were witnessing her downfall. In that moment, I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only relief that the nightmare was finally ending. Corinne's reign of terror over Oakwood Estates had come to an ignominious end, not with polite applause but with the wail of a tow truck backing up to remove her car. In the weeks that followed Corinne's eviction, Oakwood Estates underwent a transformation. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to elect new leadership, choosing a soft-spoken retired teacher who promised transparency and fairness. I had the rental property thoroughly repaired and renovated, erasing all traces of the damage Corinne had inflicted. Rather than renting it again, I decided to sell it to a young family who had been dreaming of moving into the neighborhood. Slowly, hesitantly, neighbors began stopping by my house. Some brought housewarming gifts months after my arrival. Others simply wanted to chat, to apologize, to explain their silence during Corinne's campaign against me. "We should have said something," one elderly gentleman admitted, standing awkwardly on my porch. "Fear makes cowards of decent people." I accepted their overtures with grace, understanding that they too had been victims of Corinne's tyranny in their own way. Community gatherings began to feel genuine rather than performances of suburban perfection. Gardens became expressions of personal taste rather than competitions for approval. One morning, I sat on my porch swing, the same swing where my aunt had spent countless evenings, and sipped my coffee without scanning the street for Corinne's approaching figure. The simple pleasure of relaxing in my own home without fear felt like a luxury I had almost forgotten. A local television news program contacted me about sharing my story as part of a segment on housing discrimination and HOA reform. I agreed, hoping that my experience might help others facing similar situations. "What would you tell someone dealing with what you went through?" the reporter asked during our interview. "Document everything," I replied. "Know your rights, and remember that bullies only have the power we give them." The criminal charges against Corinne for property damage resulted in probation and restitution payments. She moved to another city, though occasionally I still spotted her name in comments on neighborhood social media pages, attempting to stir up controversy from afar. On the anniversary of my aunt's passing, I visited her grave with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. The quiet cemetery provided a moment of reflection amid the chaos of the past year. "You gave me more than a house," I whispered, placing the flowers beside her headstone. "You gave me the means to stand my ground." As I walked back to my car, I thought about how my aunt had dealt with Corinne as a tenant. She had never mentioned any problems, never complained about her difficult renter. Instead, she had simply set clear boundaries and enforced them fairly. Back home, I settled onto my porch swing again, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in golden light. Children played freely in front yards. Neighbors chatted over fences. The atmosphere of surveillance and judgment had lifted, replaced by something approaching genuine community. The house across the street, Corinne's former rental, now displayed a colorful garden of native plants, a stark contrast to the regimented rows of identical flowers she had once maintained. The new owners waved when they saw me looking, and I raised my coffee cup in friendly acknowledgement. Peace had returned to Oakwood Estates, not the artificial, enforced conformity that Corinne had mistaken for harmony, but the authentic peace that comes from acceptance and respect. I had not just defended my right to live in my home, I had helped restore a neighborhood's soul. And that, more than any revenge, was the truest victory of all.